Um, so first of all, like a very quick overview of audiovisual core. Audiovisual core is a biodiversity standard, like akin to Darwin core and the other Tadwig standards, but for biodiversity media. Um, and it allows for sharing biodiversity related media items, whether it's pictures, sounds, videos, with the community, and also providing like a standard where we can hopefully link together some of the other formats which are currently in use. We're also heading towards a stage where can we use the standard to decide whether media items are of interest to or appropriate for a particular use. There is Kate, could you share the document in the chat? Your one, if you have it at hand.
Yep.
There's a more formal one there. Brilliant, thank you. So this meeting is in effect taking the place of our monthly maintenance group meetings. There's quite a few of the maintenance group here, like Dan, Rebecca, Steve, Kate, in my order. We generally meet monthly, third Wednesday of a month, to discuss upcoming proposals to a standard or how we make the standard more useful. So I've had quite a lot of discussions recently about creating like recipes. How do we take what we've got already and make it more usable for people? Things which are definitely happening is we're about to have a 30-day comment period for some terms. It kind of seems to have got lost in lots of like Tadwig activities surrounding these working sessions, but Thierry and Stan are discussing it, I think, pretty much as we speak. And the creation of the AI readiness task group. So that's it's a proposal for a group of people to go and look at creating a standard for AI readiness for media items, which was proposed to us as a maintenance group. We decided it was a good idea, and that's currently with the Tadwig. Well, it's going to be on the agenda of the next Tadwig executive meeting. So that's the two big things which are coming up. I guess the big thing we've done recently, why there's like Dan has corralled quite a few people here, is our work on not just on sound but regions of interest. And regions of interest is similar to labeling or annotation of media items. So I assume that's going to be a topic of discussion this evening here. And that's kind of all I have to say by way of introduction, unless any of the rest of the maintenance group want to jump in and say anything. Dan, maybe?
I think maybe it's useful to say a little bit about how Tadwig and Audiovisual Core work as a standard, because well, compare it against other standards bodies. So just very briefly, you might be aware of some standards bodies which have very formal ratification processes where a standard is a standard and then it is fixed, and of course that's very useful in some ways. But Tadwig follows a slightly different model where the standard can evolve gradually as a community process. So Ed mentioned these process of having something that is put forward for formal adoption, and that doesn't happen as one big standard 1.0, standard 2.0. They all come in as essentially incremental updates, and so that's how it happens. And we have, as well as, well, we have a mixture of Google Docs and a GitHub repository, which has the standard, and also we use GitHub issues to maintain some of these changes. So you'll see some of what we talk about will be literally a GitHub issue, which is the proposed alteration or addition to the standard. And so that's generally how things work around here. That's all I wanted to add.
And Steve is our master of process, being a Tadwig. veteran, I guess. Now you've retired, right? Yeah.
So I've just put in the document the proposal I think it's the one that's going up for the 30-day comment period. So you want to see an example of a change that's in process. I think that's the right one. I hope that's the right one.
There's a block of them, but they're all labeled with public comment on the GitHub, so you'll be able to find them from that one. Okay. Okay, thanks, Dan. So, given the high number of acoustics people here, Dan, did you want to do anything in particular, or just maybe have a see what our role is in these many standards related things which are going on?
Yeah, discussion is the only thing I have on my mind,
Okay.
and yeah, you mentioned the region of interest thing. So let me just say that that's not something that needs decision at the moment. That's something that we did in the past year, and we're using this concept of ROI, region of interest, which in an image is X and Y. Let's imagine, and then in sound it's time and frequency. And the low and the high frequency and the beginning and end time are all kind of, well, variously optional fields which we put together to create various kinds of bounding box. And so because the standard covers sound as well as image, the same concept of an ROI covers those. And in sound labeling, then yeah, we might think of it as a sound event or a call or a bout, something like that. Within Audubon Core, Audiovisual Core, we're being quite general here, and we don't express anything about bouts or calls or anything like that. Simply regions of interest. But that's the format that we approved in the past year. And I know that some of the people here have been talking about bounding boxes on spectrograms. So yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit more about that.
Brilliant. And so that, like, I guess both Dan and I have been approached by people who are looking at metadata standards for like labeling audio data. Some of whom are here. Does anyone want to like discuss what they've been doing with labeling data?
Yeah, because perhaps the biggest topic for us to ask out loud about is are there other things that we should be converging with? You know, this is a community process, and we want to, if there are other initiatives going on, we want to converge. Maybe Sana.
Hi, nice to meet you. So I will introduce myself because I don't know you. Well, some of you I mailed with, but so I'm Sanne Hovaert and I work for the Open Science Lab for Biodiversity in Belgium. And my expertise is actually open data and writing R packages to support the researchers. So I don't do research myself, and we mainly focus on biologging. And my colleague developed a data standard for camera trap data. It's called CamTrapDP. And last year we were approached by Julia Wil from Nina in Norway, and she asked like, this actually looks very similar as acoustic data. So we were looking if CamTrapDP can also be extended for acoustic data, and so far we think it's possible without compromising too much for the camera trap researchers. So we are at this point, we just decided it's a good thing to do, but of course we want to have lots of input from the community, so it's something that many people can use. We also compared with what is available, and we know about the TETIS project, which is also a kind of metadata standard for acoustics, but it's very detailed. We want something that that has less detail, but it's easier for many people to use. So in that sense, they are complementary depending on what you need. So if you are interested, I can share the documents where people can put input in it, or if people are interested, we can also have a chat separately. And on the Living Data Conference in Bogota next year, we also have a workshop. So I think that will also be a very good moment to chat or discuss things in real life. Well, at least if you can make it. So that was my introduction. Thank you.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you.
So I was involved on the edge of the CamTrap DP standard, and so I know there's a particular use case that they have in mind there, which is actually the camera trap devices and being able to mostly to be able to export in a simple format the data that's captured on those devices. Do you have a similar use case in mind? With Audiovisual Core, it's relatively generic, but the idea, well, Audiovisual Core originated from, let's say, querying for material in collections. And do you have a use case?
Yeah, so Julia, she came to ask us because she wants to be able to, I think, compare data. So it's more for sharing data, and the interesting thing is that at this point it's also possible to upload a CamTrap DP format to GBIF, and it's automatically translated to Darwin Core. And I think another use case is that for the camera trap community, there are some R packages that work with this data standard. So it's the way it works is that you have the deployment table, the observations tables, and the media table, and it makes it very manageable. So is that what you asked? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. The good thing about CamTrap DP is that it actually does provide a serialization format. So how to put the data onto a disk, which in Audiovisual Core we don't say that. We keep it quite generic and allow for different implementations. But yeah, so the advantage of CamTrap DP is that it is a format, a relatively simple format, on
Yes.
disk or in a zip file. Yeah.
Yeah, and as I understood about Audiovisual Core is that you can just pick whatever you want. That is now not the case with CamTrap DP. You always have everything. You don't need to fill in everything, but yeah, that makes it. But there are less terms, so it's more simple. But maybe this will change a bit. We don't know yet. But I think they have different applications where you would use it. But if it's not so, I'm very happy to hear, because as I say, I'm not a researcher. I don't work with the data myself. I'm just more of the technical part.
I don't think there's any just there. Many people involved in this are curators, technical people, all kinds of folk.
And we did have some discussion about CamTrap DP not a million years ago with Peter, didn't we? And I think we just need to get back. So first of all, I don't really see a conflict between CamTrap DP and Audiovisual Core.
So
they are complementary in many ways, right?
I was just gonna say there, like CamTrap DP basically mints all of their own terms, but they're all mapped, or a lot of them are mapped to Darwin Core and Audiovisual Core. And one of the things that I don't know that I'd be interested in knowing, Sunny was talking about the automatic mapping of CamTrap DP to Darwin Core. Is there any automated mapping to like the Audiovisual Core extension for the terms that are Audiovisual Core terms, or is that not included in those scripts?
The scripts are available, and to be honest, I don't know the terms from Audiovisual Core. I don't know them that well. So when I did the mapping, I didn't always know where the term came from because it was something that already existed and I adapted it. So maybe it would be interesting to have a look. I can share here the script.
Yeah, I know there's one of the issues with like some of the providers of media is that they don't use the full like expressiveness of Audiovisual Core, like they use, I forget what, a simple media extension or something. And Audiovisual Core lets you be very expressive about things, and but I feel like people don't know that and therefore they don't use it. So that's something that might be interesting, especially if it could be automated. That, you know, might encourage people to use the more expressive properties.
Yeah, actually, so the whole transformation on GBIF is just the script that I shared. So we can adapt it and then it will be this for all the data sets, it will change. So it would be interesting to maybe have a look at it because I don't think we use much from Audiovisual Core, but if that's an advantage, we can look into it.
I think that's something we can possibly put down for a meeting in the future. Like possibly one of the maintenance group ones, and just go, okay, these are sensible mappings we could do. And that's like a solid thing we can do quite quickly and with it. Santiago, you were next in the.
Thanks. So yeah, I guess also for the people who don't know me, I'm Santiago. I just recently finished my PhD, and I've been doing a lot of bioacoustics and kind of developing AI tools for detection, but also spent quite a lot of time developing an annotation tool for audio, which is called Humbat. And doing so, I had the question for Dan, which is, in the tool, there's a kind of an equivalent thing to the region of interest, which I call geometry for some weird reason. But anyways, one of the things I was thinking about when building the tool is that sometimes people want to have a bit more granularity about how to kind of delineate the region of interest. And bounding boxes might not always be kind of the best case. And for example, if I use a polygon in the spectrogram, is that still considered a region of interest? Is the standard flexible enough to also allow these kind of situations?
What we have in Audiovisual Core is basically rectangles and circles. That's all that's supported. So arbitrary polygons, no. Simple as that.
I think there was when we were developing this, there was a discussion about whether we should support, at least in the context of images, whether we should support polygons. And the answer at that point was somebody needs to tell us they need it, and then we need to figure out how to do it. Like we didn't want to try to develop something if we didn't really know like what the use case was for it. So I think the concept of region of interest itself is very generic. So, and as Ed said earlier, Audiovisual Core is extensible. So if there's a need for something and there's a way to do it and the community can reach consensus on it, it could, in theory, be added.
Yeah, so I think the general thing is we don't add things which aren't going to be used by someone. So if you have data which is going to be shared and it has these regions in it, something we could and should discuss.
So, and actually, let me just say, more than one person.
Okay, more than one person.
Like there has to be at least two in order for it to be sharing. I think in Darwin Core, that's kind of there has to be at least two people who say they want something. So like if you just want to do it in your own database, go for it. But for sharing purposes, there has to be a community or several people who agree that they want it.
And that community doesn't just have to be people doing stuff on spectrograms, right? That could be people selecting the specimen in an image or some chunk of 3D space in the future or whatever. So, yeah, I think something we should think about and maybe see if there are people who are doing things beyond what we are doing. Klaus, you have your hand up.
Yes, hello. I'm Klaus Rieder. I'm working with orthoptera songs. I'm retired, and I'm working now in Spain, mainly with Audiomoth recordings. I'm not quite up to date with the TEDWIG discussion, I must admit. That's why I participated here. My main concern at the moment is working especially with the echoacoustics people who are accumulating huge amounts of terabytes of data. And with iNaturalist, that we have a lot of acoustic data, and I'm not sure if anybody applies Audubon Core, how is it stored in the sound files? For example, if we have pictures, you have the EXIF file with a picture, which is sort of an industry standard. So if you download a picture, at least you see the EXIF file and you see, is it georeferenced? Maybe you see the author, etc. If you download a WAV file from GBIF, for example, via whatever provider, you normally get nothing if you look in the metadata. With the Audiomoth files, at least you have time and UTC, and you have the sample rate, etc., but you have nothing. So my concern is, how do we get audio any standard into the sound files, and into which sound files? Because we have MP3 in use and we have WAV in use. So I don't know if that's a point in your discussion. Question.
Yeah. Shall I start? I mean, I can say something to this, and others might have other things to add for sure. The first thing to say is that along with other TADWIG standards, Audiovisual Core tries to be quite agnostic about the format in which it is serialized. So you can save Audiovisual Core data as CSV or XML or something like that, or of course in ID3 tags, things like this. And I know it's not routinely done, so it's not routine that systems will encode these kind of metadata additionally into ID3 tags in MP3s, for example. I'm aware of there's another standard which was developed by the BACT community, this standard called Guano, which was very deliberately targeted at being able to put the metadata into WAV in very compressed format. So that's kind of interesting. But we just remain agnostic to that, and so there's not much I can say about how to embed the data into audio files. Personally, I tend to handle it outside of the audio files. I don't know. Does anyone have anything better to add?
Are you in touch with these Guano people, or is there communication between you and these other people?
Yes, a little bit. We got in touch with them specifically when we were adding some metadata. Well, actually, for the region of interest development, we needed to add to Audiovisual Core, we needed to add a low frequency and a high frequency parameter. And so they already had it in Guano, so we were getting in touch with them to make sure that our newly defined keys would be compatible with theirs. So that's the extent of the collaboration so far.
One thing that I was gonna add, and that is one thing that we've talked about trying to do as a helpful ancillary thing, is to document how people are using audiovisual core. So not so much to prescribe that this is how you do it, but rather to share how other people are doing things. And so that is, you know, possibly a role for this group, even though it's unlikely that we would develop a specification for something like what you're talking about.
Any industry standard which would be useful, or use cases from music industry, for example. Especially as you mentioned artificial intelligence in your opening remark. I think topics like authors, like authenticity, etc., will become more and more important. So I think it will be relevant to think about how to tag sound snippets somehow inside the WAV or MP3, because if there is a multimedia file and you have some CSV outside, we all know this will get lost. I mean, it's vehicular.
But there's kind of two ways though, isn't there? There's kind of actually embedding it in a file, and then there's a container format that's flexible.
Yeah.
So if you look at like Matroska, the format, you can actually put arbitrary files in the container file, which like we have done before. I've done before just to like store labels without them going wandering. But like that's not a standard way of doing anything. But like there's like if what's possible in a format is not good enough, there are container formats where you can put like extended metadata in. And like Matroska is one where you can just put an XML file in there, and it's kind of ignored unless you go to read it.
I believe MPEG-4 is flexible enough for all of this. Like MPEG-4, I think, contains a lot of metadata for regions as well as for overall. And so you mentioned industry standards class. Some of we have been through various standards while developing ours, and the IIIF standard and W3C for on the web side of things. And I wasn't involved in this, but Adobe's standards, which they use for embedding metadata in various forms, those are certainly connected. We have found mappings between their standards and what we have. I'm not aware of anything else that we should be connecting to in that regard.
Thank you.
That's something we could possibly revisit as a separate discussion for those who are interested. Like it's something which the acoustics people probably should sort out at some point, I think, but I'm not sure it's a purely audiovisual core discussion. Emily, you are next.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'll also take a second to introduce myself. I'm Emily T. Griffiths. I am American, but I work for Aarhus University here in Europe, in Denmark. And I am one of the producers of the vast amount of data that Klaus was talking about. I regularly collect terabytes and terabytes of wave data every single year. I contribute to many ICES databases for Denmark's national commitments for underwater noise, both continuous and impulsive, as well as a lot of marine mammal detections. We also work with the bat folks here at Aarhus to help synthesize their results. We're getting birds on there as well, Dan, just letting you know that. But the other thing is that I'm working on a large project, which is the Digital Twin Ocean project, which is an effort to basically standardize a lot of data that's being collected around Europe to be used by models. Which is how I reached out to Dan in the first place, because he has been instrumental in basically sharing up what Darwin Core is doing in terms of the detection and classification of marine mammals. I had a couple of things that I wanted to comment on. One, in terms of metadata, I understand the utility of embedding it directly into the WAV file, but I will say that I never upload any of my WAV files directly anywhere. And I'm not allowed to without express permission from my dean. So that might be something that might be a conversation that's not necessarily worth digging into, depending on what the data providers are, because with a lot of folks, you're not necessarily going to be able to get them to upload that data. We use H5 files, like a hierarchical strategy. So you have like all of the information, like all of the detections or all of the noise data in one section of the hierarchical file, and then the metadata in another. So it is married, it's together. And that's been very, very useful. I really appreciate the work that ICES has done on this. They've done a lot of work in terms of the standardization, and we're trying to bring that over to the DTO. The other thing I wanted to just touch on really quick is polygons, and that is for underwater deployments. The idea that you're going to drop it in the exact same place every single time is not feasible. Like the idea of having a single, like, and I'm sorry if I'm not actually understanding what you guys are talking about in Polygon. This might be my misunderstanding, but we tend to have polygons of deployment where it's, you know, a half a kilometer, like it, or it's rather not that, it's like a 30-meter square grid where like the hydrophone is somewhere in this area because you don't actually know. You put it in the water, you hope it lands as close to where you take the GPS point as possible. But depending on how the currents are doing or the depth, how long it has to drop, there's just there's no way to really know that it's, you know, it's generally in that area. So we tend to use polygons for that purpose, where a station is a polygon around where our intended station is, if that makes any sense. I think other than that, I don't really have anything else to say. If you guys have any questions about what a lot of other big data folks are doing, I'd be happy to answer them. But I know that we're very interested in Darwin Core right now, but I'm not able to submit any of my data to these things yet. But I'm super keen to learn about what other groups are doing because we can always be better.
Great, thanks. Let me just jump in because I want to ask if so actually the sharing of metadata without directly sharing the files, I think that would be something useful to comment on. But maybe Steve or Ed can actually give the word on it. I think we have a lot of use cases where you can't necessarily access the original media. Sometimes we have cases where you can access thumbnails or low resolution, but you can't access the original, various things like that. So the standard is flexible for that.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah, I think-
designed it specifically with that in mind. I think at the time it was files were too big to put on a floppy disk or something like that. But the idea was you could access the metadata and this, you know, determining fitness of use. And then once you've screened out things, you could maybe request particular media items. So it's definitely had that kind of a use in mind when Audiovisual Core was first developed.
I think there's definitely a utility there. I think particularly with certain programs like PamGuard, which can clip like your sound file down to something much smaller. So you would basically get the time and the frequency of what it is that you're looking at, and then just a very, very short like waveform, not necessarily a wave file, but a waveform that you can then process in R or Python or whatever your programming language of choice is. So that would be, but that would come again, something that's easily put into a database. So it's processed data. It's already been detected for you. It's not just a raw WAV file.
Can I say something about the polygons? So I think there's a distinction that you're talking about geographic polygons, and I think I'm right in saying Santiago was referring to polygons on the spectrogram. So imagine
Okay.
drawing a box, drawing a freehand box on a spectrogram, and that might be a use case that some people want. So these are quite different, definitely different in my opinion. So I would assume that Santiago's use case is something that Audiovisual Core is the right team to ask. Whereas for the deployment, it seems more to fit with Darwin Core, where we're talking about the sampling event. So that's you know, we're all in the same house here, but with Audiovisual Core, we don't really deal with the most of the details of the sampling event or the observation event.
I apologize for that misunderstanding.
No, that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for, to work it all out.
And actually, like, if we're going to start doing that, we should look at what Darwin Core are doing about polygons and stuff. Just so there's some
Yeah.
logical consistency in methods between these standards.
And also the Humboldt extension of Darwin Core is all about documenting surveys and how they are done. So that's a new thing that just came out like last year.
Good. Sonny.
Yeah, I realized something because somebody mentioned Adobe, that I think all the terms that come from Adobe, the links don't work. It would be good if they were maintained in a sustainable way or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, just a little remark. Or did you already know? Or
Well, this has been a long-standing problem with non-resolvable IRIs that we use. Some of them were like originally defined in PDFs, and so there's like no way to jump to a fragment identifier with a PDF easily. And so that's yeah, just I guess one of the hazards of adopting other groups identifiers without minting them yourself. If there should be an updated link like to the documentation, so if that documentation link is not working, we should fix that. But like the actual IRIs themselves never resolved even in the beginning. I think there's a note about that in the Audiovisual Core list of terms somewhere.
So if anyone has any sway with Adobe, you can tighten some thumb screws and see if we can get them to do something. But I think we did address this in the last year or so, didn't we? It was an issue.
and there is
And
no other solution than to wait for them to do it? Is there
like there's not much we can do apart from like reach out to them or start minting our own version of the same thing, which seems a bit like we're polluting the space a bit. Okay, you've just
I don't know if this helps at all, other than flogging, unfortunately, like a tricky situation where I don't know how much looking at that industry standards side of things and like people in industry, I don't know how many of those people are in these standards groups. And I think it's a fair question to ask if Adobe ever did have a way of getting involved, or if anyone here has a chance to reach out to them. It does seem so hit and miss sometimes to try and engage with those types of parties, but it's definitely not going to happen if we don't try. So there's that side of things. Semi-relatedly, and not too shamelessly plug it, but the 3D task group, there were a few other community 3D standards groups that did include and try to include some people from like 3D industry, which that's another big one out there. And they have likewise their own like technical needs and things to conform to in order to even render something in some cases. So I don't know. I'm not suggesting that's a perfect model to follow, because likewise those are hard to sustain those relationships. Sadly, there's lots of turnover sometimes, but in the cases where Adobe itself, I don't know if the dust has settled from when they like overhauled their whole community blogs and boards thing. I think that broke a lot of groups that hung together a little bit, but those might be places to maybe ping and check for where and how can we at least resolve these IRIs. I did go down a rabbit hole a couple months ago, and somewhere on archive.org, there's like an updated, I forget which one, XMP, I think, had a few of their own terms that you could almost, but not quite, trace down to. That's 2 cents. I know that doesn't help necessarily, but we're all ears on how to follow up on leads.
Yeah, I put a link to this borrowed vocabulary table that's in the list of terms, and I just checked both of the Adobe XMP links are broken. So maybe what we need to do is find those in the Internet Archive and link to those, because I think we've updated it several times and Adobe doesn't make any attempt to keep a stable URL for those. Maybe the Wayback Machine can help us.
It's desperate, but it's there.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, being pragmatic rather than absolutely correct is the way forward, I guess. Sonny, you've got your hand up. Okay. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to say about acousticsy stuff while we're on the topic, whether related to what we've discussed about or not? No. Ah. So I was reading your comment, Rebecca. Might be the way in then.
Yeah, we worked with them to get support for the new IPPC accessibility fields, and they're now in all their products. And that was a pretty positive interaction. I think we presented at a couple of conferences, like internal conferences at Adobe around that. So that is a possible contact point within to get some traction.
Okay, I think in that case, do you mind just putting an issue in for the next meeting to, if we work out, so if we have a discussion what we actually want to ask from them in very like clear and explicit terms,
Yep.
It's probably easier going with a concrete defined ask of them. Yeah, thank you.
For
That's
sure.
really useful.
Yeah, and I don't know if the contacts that we have at Adobe would be appropriate for this, but they hopefully will be able to direct us to the right person.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. A glimmer. Okay. Is there anything else anyone particularly wants to discuss?
I don't have a ton of details on the 3D task group. I realize most folks here, it sounds like most of you guys are from the audio acoustics end of things. So if anybody suddenly wants to add a couple extra dimensions, not to suggest sound isn't 3D in some cases. As a heads up, there were some terms in the works for 3D proposals, so I'm happy to put a link to those if folks wanted to read up on them. I think Doug Boyer over at Duke, he's worked on morphosource.org and done a lot of the hard work of trying to model out and lay out what some terms might be for properly and fully documenting things like CT scans, 3D models, a lot of other data and media that kind of fits in that type of bucket. So a simple addition to DC terms type is what we've landed on for 3D, wow, something in the range of like 3D resource. I'm totally blanking on what the name of that was. That's the simpler edition. The other edition is a smaller other set of terms that would help document what modality was a 3D thing generated by, for instance, CT scan, other types of scanning, versus a mesh type or polygon type model, and beyond from there. So what resolutions was it scanned out at, and so forth. So I'll pause there, and Santiago, go for it.
Now that we're in the topic of the spatial things, do you think the work you're doing will cover also kind of trying to describe the source of a sound? If you're doing, for example, sound localization, and you have kind of a chain of calls from an individual, and you can describe each of those pulses, is that something you might be able to do with that those new terms?
I hadn't thought about that's a really good question, and I'm not being slopey shoulders, I promise, but that might end up more in the land of Darwin core potentially if you're trying to geo-reference a particular point in space. That might go back to that kind of a question, but if you're trying to reference it within a media resource of some kind, and if that's more of what you're talking about,
Yeah,
that
kind
may
of.
well, yeah, I don't know what kinds of spatial audio, I don't know my way around like that world. If that's a Dan and or Ed type question too.
So this is coming to my attention because after this meeting, we're going out to like do a LiDAR scan of our garden. So we can create a 3D model of our garden and then localize sounds within that. So like localizing it in the LiDAR scan is more of a you problem, and doing that in real life is more of a Darwin core problem. So I think this risks confusing quite a lot of things, so we don't need to discuss it now. But like, yeah, that is starting to get on my radar as things we should be thinking about.
Yeah, it feels like it starts
Like,
getting philosophical and like map territory.
yeah, I think that's a. I need to get a tweed jacket and start smoking a pipe to really get the best out of that thing. But but yeah, in the end, I was just going to say that I haven't got to the bottom of this yet, but I have been making some inquiries. Is we might be able to get some money off Tadwig Executive to hold a meeting about the sound aspects of audiovisual core, particularly as there seems to be quite a few people in a fairly defined area like Europe. So we might be able to get some money to perhaps with alongside another conference. I think we discussed briefly whether it would be IBAC this year or something. So if people are interested in maybe having a workshop to discuss these bits of whether it's mapping like audiovisual core to like CamTrap DP audio version or some other versions of that. If you are interested, just drop us a line, drop me or Dan, I guess, a line if you don't mind corralling your team or your people that side of that. Big conscious of time. Sana, you mentioned living data, which I will be going to. Does anyone else know if they're going or plans to or unsure?
Assuming things are stable, then yes.
Yeah.
And this was 2026, was it?
2020, it's this year.
Okay. Sorry,
September. September, October, September.
The Bogota meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will be there. Sounds like Sane at least, and hopefully Rebecca. So hopefully we can meet and discuss what's left over if we haven't resolved it by then. At that point would be really positive. I don't have much else in my list of things, which is probably good because we've only got a few minutes left. Does anyone want to say anything, contribute anything?
Yep. Are any
We'll have enough.
particular recipes useful for folks or in the works already? I don't know if that's something we wanted to.
Yes. So one of the things we have been trying to do this year, as the maintenance group, is provide some recipes or like how-tos for using the standard for real world data. So I've been collecting a few from Sounds, and Dan's contributed a few, I think, and we'll have you doing other bits of the standard. And Klaus mentioned like how do we perhaps like there is a recipe for embedding metadata in sound files. So these are things which are not necessarily entirely standards based, but like how do people actually use the standard in real world terms? So if there's any bits which are unclear or either are unclear and we could do better explaining what to do, or you have some great examples of, we'd definitely be interested in hearing that, because at the end of the day we want these things, these terms and these vocabularies and stuff to be used and useful. So if you ever find bits which are like a bit unclear, or you don't know how to do it, or you create this beautiful implementation, we'd love to hear from you in all cases.
So I'm just trying to find out where are the recipes right now. I've been there before, but I can't find them this
The
instant.
recipes are in the Google Drive somewhere.
Yes.
Or you sent me an email with a link to the acoustics one about a month ago.
So they're not public, or
I
We
think at the
do have
moment we're
a-
just
There's an example that Steve put in the notes
yeah, okay.
earlier today. I'm just.
I think they're kind of like they're made public once we've gotten to a stage where we're happy to share them. But if people want to be involved in the working draft of it, I don't see any problem sharing it. Like the more eyes, the better, and the more useful examples, the better.
yeah. So this is good. So there's Steve's from the notes there's the ROI recipes, which might be relevant for some of us here. But yeah, we these are not normative. They're just examples. So we want as many examples as possible, really.
Yeah, people ask for examples a lot, more than specifications.
Brilliant. Okay, last chance for questions, comments, dance routines.
Was one of our goals to sort of establish targets for the next year, what we want to work on, or I guess we sort of have some ideas from this document.
We have some ideas here. I think there was a meeting a few months ago where we put a few things down. And there was recipes and focusing on publicity a bit. 3D task group. Sorting out the things. If there is anything which we should be working on, which isn't on that list, then Santiago.
No, sorry. So, well, this is a bit more speculative, but one of the things I've been kind of working on while doing the annotation tool is this Python package, which supports a lot of kind of the def data structure around it. And I was, well, because I wanted it to make like the tool to be quite flexible, I did not impose any kind of structure on the type of tags you add to sound events. But I was thinking it might be really useful that if you want to use one of the like standard audiovisual core or Darwin core terms, it'd be nice to be able to do that. So I've started kind of just creating a list of that in the Python, in one Python package, and expose it as kind of this structured object that you can use throughout in whatever you do in Python, like attach it to whatever you want. But it already has all these information about the standard definition according to the standard, stuff like that. Is that something that is of interest to include also in one of these recipes or examples?
Yeah, I think like well, it's definitely an example of use, which is great. Thank you for doing that. Possibly it's also we should have a section on like somewhere on light tools which conform or make use of a standard. Because like if you're using a tool, you're not necessarily aware of the standards underneath it. So that's something we should definitely think about. Yeah, like could you drop something in the chat or email me?
Yeah.
And like I think that's something we should possibly discuss at a maintenance group meeting. Is do we separate tools and recipes, or is there a tidy way of presenting that kind of thing? And that actually, people building tools around the standard is really important. So demonstrating that's really good for everyone, I think. Thank you. Okay. We are nearly out of time, so I'll leave it all there. If there are things you think we should be doing but aren't, you could either email one of the maintenance group, or ideally just drop a GitHub issue and we'll pick it up at one of our meetings. So again, so we meet the third Wednesday of every month. If you want to be added to the mailing list, email, I guess, Kate, you've got the invitation main list.
Yeah, I'll throw my
Yeah.
email in the chat. And if we're okay with making that Zoom link public somewhere too, I'm inviting like Zoom photobombing, that kind of thing, but I'm happy to also put that somewhere accessible if folks ever need to share it out as well. In fact, I might put it at the top of the upcoming agenda documents, and if we end up linking those on GitHub issues, happy to do that too. But yeah, don't hesitate to email if you'd like to show up.
Brilliant. Yeah, so thank you. It's lovely to see some new people and get some fresh perspectives and see what's going on. Sorry to the rest of the maintenance group, it's mainly been acoustics people, but at least there's a community of interest, and like we're getting some stuff hopefully together and done positive. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it there. So, thank you all, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.